Three, two, one. We're finally live. Travis, it's always great to see you.
Hey, Leon, great to see you as well.
Thank you for jumping in. It's always a pleasure talking to you, and thank you for coming. Introduce yourself a little bit. So, who are you? What do you do? And why are we having this
Sure.
conversation?
Yep. So thanks for that, Leon. I'm Travis Pomposello. I'm live in New York City, born and raised New Yorker. Um, I'm probably a little older than most people in Self-Mastered. I'm a Gen Xer. I had a long career in the television business, and I also had a long career as a creative agency owner following my career in television. And I sort of hit that wrinkle like many people did during COVID, where my business became very frail and very fragile, and I eventually had to close it. And from there, I was able to generate other business and get things going. But it was really never getting back to that success that I had experienced in the corporate C-suite or as an agency owner. And it all just started to collapse
Hmm.
on me. And, you know, I think when we first spoke, I had said to you that I felt like I had lost my confidence. I felt like I was no longer productive. I didn't feel happy and I didn't feel like at peace with what direction I was going in. I felt that in a way I was just sort of treading water
Hmm.
and sort of easily getting distracted, along the way, as opposed to really feeling like I was on a path.
Good. And this was about 3 months ago, more or less.
Yeah, this was right around the holiday time.
Mhm.
I think like most people, I came to that end of the year like inflection point where and also I was probably reflecting it out because many people were saying to me like, "What's going on with you?"
Hmm.
And I was really having that inflection point where I knew I needed to step up, make changes, move forward, um, find something to get me out of what I guess could easily describe as a rut that originally started, at least perceived to me as a business rut, but really then started to fester and grow and poison the other areas of my life.
Because in your case, for context, you have been a high performer all your life. When you were young, you were in the Olympic boxing team of the
Yeah.
US. So
Yes.
you know what high performance looks like. You've been a high performing individual. So your standards have always been naturally very high. So any deviation from them automatically affects your mindset and your routines, right?
For sure. I mean, I thank you for that. I've been blessed to have had that athletic background, to been in the C-suite of media, to have had a successful company. So the way I'm wired is if I'm not winning, I'm losing. And
Exactly.
when I'm losing, I'm just not in a good place.
Hmm. And that is when we first started. That is when we engaged, right? You wanted to get back to winning. And
Yes.
but why do you sign up for a performance accelerator for a self-mastery so deeply focused program? Because what we sell is not productivity or mindset or routines, is a deep transformation. So why were you seeking back then and what did you get?
Yeah. So I originally thought that I needed productivity. And I started looking for productivity solutions, which often really just sort of felt short.
Mhm.
I won't name names. There's famous books, there's famous people, there's all those things. And it just wasn't really getting me there. And I got introduced to your YouTube channel and I was started watching things. And it started unlocking for me things around my training for sports. When I was training for sports, I was training many different systems to be good at winning that game. And there's a few videos that you put out that explain that same type of system thinking, if you will,
Mhm.
or how self-master touches on different systems to transform to get to that place, get to winning, like I had learned in sport. And I became very attracted, and that philosophy appealed to me. I don't know why. I had never thought about the fact that, okay, we talked about I was a high level boxer. There was all these systems that went into that. nutrition, hydration, training, technique, coaching, sleep, all these things. Even though I was very successful in business, I never thought of that system being applied to
Business.
business, to relationships, to all, all these different areas. I just compartmentalized them just for sport and was really great at it and really systematized by it. And it
Mhm.
paid off incredibly. But I never thought about it being transferable to other areas of life. And that's what really attracted me to the program.
Love it. And I would argue that even though we touch on all of those things, what I would call physiological intervention, so sleep, nutrition, breath work, kind of regulate your state, what I believe you benefited the most from, but I want you to correct me on this if I'm wrong, is all the deep mental training, we call it mental rewiring that we do, how to
Hmm.
understand the mind as a tool that you can control through your attention and your awareness. And you can literally, over time, rewire that mind so you have less of the negative thoughts because you weaken the neural connection that create them and have
Hmm.
more of the thoughts that are actually aligned towards the goal. And that is the secret of productivity. It's not what app or template or operating system you use. It's literally how good you are at saying yes to the right things and no to the wrong things. And that is a deeply mental thing, right?
Yeah, that was the biggest unlock for me. And since we're on the sports thing, I can easily make this analogy, is I could create for you, Leon, like the greatest workout plan of all times. But if you're not in shape to perform it, you're not going to be able to perform it and you're not going to benefit from it. In my case, um, productivity, achievement in business, and those things were fine. But I was no longer mentally in shape to
Mm-hmm.
be able to use those systems, use those tools. So before I could even adopt or adapt what you teach in Self-Mastered around productivity and systems thinking around business, I needed to get myself in shape mentally and spiritually to be able to utilize those systems to their highest potential. So that was the big unlock for me. I just wasn't, I used the metaphor, I wasn't in shape. I came in like incredibly out of shape spiritually and mentally, whether that be through everything I went through, like I said, with COVID or other losses or things with getting older and all the noise that exists out in the world. And that depletion of that had me so out of shape that nothing in productivity was ever going to work. It was so much easier just to scroll my phone, right? Or sit down to do any kind of task. I was just too out of shape to do it. You know, in in that area of performance.
And what's interesting is that most people don't realize that this is the core driver of success. And the fact that you say I was mentally in shape doesn't mean that you didn't do the right things. Because when you're physically in shape, it's because you're not training. But the mind, by definition, is not something that any one of us is taught to train. So you're warranted, literally, to hit a mental ceiling. If you're a high performer, extremely successful, you consistently do the right things, you hit this later in life. If
Mhm.
you never really learn how to perform, you hit it very soon. But everyone hits it because at some point, and this is what hitting a mental ceiling looks like, the conscious desire of achieving something is in conflict with the subconscious belief that that is possible. And that is when procrastination happens. That is when you have crazy thoughts, when you have fear of failure, all of those things, right? Which is the things that we started working together and we fixed through this.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I mean, I think from that, the outcomes that I had, and this isn't to say, like you just said, that I couldn't have, or that I wasn't doing the things, but by getting in shape in that capacity, getting or letting go, if you will, not to go too far into,
Mhm.
into that realm, what we've worked on in those 3 months with that going on in the background, right? With that training in the background was, I feel I have a crystal clear 10-year plan in front of me, right? That we put together. We created systems for my daily life, my weekly life, my monthly life. You and I were discussing my 12-week roadmap going forward prior in our last call that yes, I could have sat down and done, but it was rooted in something completely different, right?
Mhm.
It wasn't rooted in um I'm not saying it wasn't rooted in reality, but it was reactive to my situation versus being proactive to, in a sense, to movement, right?
Mhm.
Into moving into a direction before I was reacting to my circumstance. And that's very different. So now I have this proactive, let's call it 10-year plan versus a reactive 10-year plan, which I think anyone could throw together anytime, right? I want to make more money. I want to have a business. I want to have this. I want to have that. And, these things versus something very proactive.
When you are reactive, is you're operating from what we call the mental wounds, right? Everybody wants
Mhm.
to be free and make more money and be healthy, right? But those are like
Right.
base level instincts that still do not illuminate a clear path forward.
Mhm.
We need to understand where do our strengths lie? How do we capitalize on them? What is actually blocking the execution? Because as I always say, you guys, for the most part, already know how to get where you want to go. The problem is either
Yeah.
not knowing what exactly is that thing or not doing it. And this is mental friction. It's always this mental fitness thing that we
Mhm.
typically talk about.
Mhm.
And to be specific, so in terms, just ballpark, right? Because I don't know how would you gauge this, but in terms of productivity, procrastination that used to happen, it doesn't happen anymore. Self-doubt that used to happen, it doesn't happen anymore. How has your productivity, your overall confidence, your consistent execution has evolved by mastering
Yeah.
this?
It's it's been exponential. I mean, some days I've always been able to rely on like grit, right? And just grind through it. I wouldn't have been successful otherwise. But the difference now is that instead of over relying on, let's say, that grit and on that grind, it's the productivity has grown because I'm operating with rhythm and intentionality
Mhm.
versus just get it done. Like, the get stuff done mentality versus the intentionality of getting things done, the rhythm of getting things done has made me much more productive. It's hard to even figure the multiplier on it because not on because right, it's how you define productivity, right? You
Mhm.
teach us about work blocks in the program. I get so much done in a day of work blocks. Now I end up with free time that in the past I would have felt guilty about not being productive, but I
Mhm.
use it to be productive in very different ways. And whether that is about improving my mental performance or learning a new skill, things I just didn't have time for. So that additional piece that then loops back around. And now now that I've upskilled or I've become more, mentally attuned with things, now when I'm, you know, so-called grinding, it's like huge.
Yeah, you broke the spell of hustle, as I call it, because everybody tells you to hustle, hustle until you figure things out. Typically, what happens you end up burning out. The solution here is train your mind to make the most of every single minute, high leverage, getting a flow state. I love it. And business wise, remember you were in a phase transition in the beginning. You
Yeah.
have this idea. You weren't sure it was the right idea. What has happened in the past 3 months? Because the progress has been incredible.
I think the main thing and another epiphany of sorts in working through the program, especially the course material, is I think you put words on it, but I even discovered for myself that someone with my background, um, it's very reputation based. And I was
Mhm.
very worried about my reputation because I had always been a high performer, always succeeded, always had these big titles or, big accolades. So my reputation really mattered to me. And again, being reactive, right? Thinking about my goals are tied around maintaining my reputation, or my goals are tied around making more money or having enough money. And, working through all that and realizing that's a byproduct of the work, not the goal of the work,
Mhm.
really freed me up. And it just gave me the ability to go for it, right? I feel very, fortunate that because of my background, I have a lot of skills. I have a lot of business skills, but in a way, I was afraid to put myself out there with those outside of the normal construct that I had come from, which would be, working in corporate or, having a well-funded agency that I opened, right? So, by putting myself out there and not being concentrated on the thought of reputation or about just making money, it just has been very successful for me so far.
And now you have a new business. Are about to publish a new product. Things are moving in the right
Yes.
direction. That 10-year vision is locked in. I love that. That is exactly
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
we
It
want.
is. It is. It is really extraordinary. And I had mentioned to you on one of our calls that I think is important, and I've been thinking a lot about lately. You mentioned I'm working on a product, and when you create a product, you have a product. Many people listening to this think about this or have one. There's a lot of adversity that goes along
A lot.
in building anything.
Yeah.
But when we're standing on the top of the mountain, we seem to forget about all the adversity.
Yeah.
And, one of the things that going through self-mastery really opened up for me is that adversity is just part of the process. And, letting go of what you can control is just part of the process. And that's been the adversity I've been through these past months, everything that's going on in the world. If I didn't have that mindset, if I hadn't developed that mindset, I'd have
Mhm.
just
Of
given up.
course.
And
This is what I
for
call
me, for me, that
infinite
would be
co
soul crushing because
Yeah.
I fancy myself a win at all costs type person.
The thing is, this is what I call, I thank you for sharing that because I think that's a very, very important insight. This is what I personally call the infinite comfort zone because we're always going to go through difficult times. Those are absolutely guaranteed. Life is going to bring us pain. And
Mhm.
especially if we're trying to build something that is great, we're trying to really push forward and build elite businesses, elite products, really create a life that we can be proud of. That comes with friction. There's absolutely no way around it.
Yeah.
Now, how you conceptualize that friction as a burden or a blessing, and more importantly, how you rewire your mind to avoid reactively creating situations that end up creating problems down the line and instead proactively seek the solution. That switch is what makes elite performers.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
every time something goes wrong in the world, in tariff land or whatever, that is exactly what makes elite founders, elite performers just like you, so much more capable of handling it. That is the key.
Yeah. For sure. I mean, I love what you're saying there. And, it's funny, it like deeply resonates with me, probably because you know me and you've gotten to
Yeah.
know me and we've gotten to know each other. And that's really for me why maintaining what I have learned through the program is so important because it's not like generic productivity.
Hmm.
Everything has been built around me, right? It's been built around my patterns, my goals, my contacts. You never told me, don't use your phone. You never told me, do this, do that. But you said, there's been systems that have been suggested
Hmm.
and it's been built around my things. A very, very clear example of this is when I came into the program and you told me where in the course to begin versus start at the beginning. You listened to me and you said, I think the best place for you to start is here. I might be wrong. Let's see how it goes. Right. And we went into that process. So I feel, as opposed to just being a rigid, generic productivity course, it's forced me to go deep and focus on how to define my vision, not the vision you want for me, the vision I want for me, the vision I want for me, the identity I want to have, not the one you want to have for me. But the systems have really allowed that to, in a sense, almost be like surgically precise when it
Hmm.
comes to what I'm looking for or what I was looking for when I came in.
That is the difference between productivity or self-development and actual self-mastery. There's no other way around it. We have to make sure that everything that we do together comes from within you, is accepted by you, and is nurtured by you, right? You're never going to sustain anything you don't deeply believe belongs to you at a deep identity level. So
Mhm.
this is why our stuff works and why productivity typically and so that doesn't work, because it's not personal enough. There's
Right.
not enough you in the equation for you to care. To just read the book, download the app, use the template for a couple of days, and that's it. There's nothing that goes deep enough to unlock the transformation, which is why I
Right.
can tell you don't look at your phone, but that is going to be good for a couple of days. If I made you realize of how the phone, just to an example, is a very basic
Yeah.
example, is actually hurting your ability to refrain from automatic subconscious reactions to whatever you're checking on the phone, and find your center and train your awareness and how that affects your ability to handle your negative thoughts. Once you understand that chain of logic and you experience it, that's when you're sold.
Yeah. Agreed. Couldn't agree more.
Beautiful.
Perfectly stated.
Well, that's great. Well, last question. I really, really appreciate you coming in. Who do you think this
Happy
is
to do it.
for? Because this is not for everyone. This is for a specific type of person that really wants to win. How would you kind of position this? Who would you invite to join our community of
Yeah.
elite
You know,
founders?
and I've thought about this. I've referred Self-Mastered to a few colleagues and friends. And it's interesting because they haven't followed through. And I'm going to go back to, you know, sport metaphor.
Hmm.
It's like people sign up for the gym and they don't show up. And and it's not for everybody because consistency in anything is super important. When I've made the recommendation to people, and I'll say it on here, I feel like more and more, especially today, we're all playing defense and it's exhausting. And if you're really just tired of playing defense in your life or your business, and you want to develop for yourself a playbook to run an offense, this is the place to come.
You're speaking just like a Olympic athlete, right?
Can't help it. It's all I've got.
You got
You've
me
exhausted
fired.
my full bag. You've exhausted my full bag of tricks. Yeah.
You fired me up with that sentence. Anyway, Travis, as I said, it's an absolute pleasure always talking
Likewise.
to you. You've been a fantastic student so far. We've been 3 months into this, so we have nine
Yeah.
months at least together. Now let's really map out kind of the next phase because we're in a much better position now. And it's all about continuously evolving and winning and playing, of course, in the offense.
Yeah, for sure. I couldn't be more excited, Leon. I mean, it gets you fired. It gets me fired up to talk about it.
Because you're seeing the results, right? Where you were to where you are now is a totally different predicament.
For sure.
Like, how much, if you have to quantify, how much progress have you made in 3 months? Like, normal progress? Because people say a year, 2 years. Like, the last 3 months has been incredible.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think well, let me equate it
Mhm.
to past, past things. Here's a silly analogy. 3 months ago, I was entry level at a job, and I've already gotten my first promotion.
Incredible. Which you did, because now you have a business, you have
Yeah,
clients, you have a
exactly.
product. Dude, you have fantastic. Travis, thank you very much. See you on our next call.
Thank you. Thanks, Leon.
Thank you.
Take
Bye bye.
care.
Take care.